To date, I have plowed about 500 hours into Monster Hunter Rise on the Nintendo Switch, and I have loved every single minute of it. It is, for me, easily amongst my top games for this year. And while it has now been 200 days since it launched on Nintendo Switch and the hype has largely settled down, it's about to get a huge resurgence, because it's about to break free from its Switch exclusivity and the graphical and performance limitations that platform held it to. Starting with a free demo available in just a few days from when this video goes up, and I'll drill into that in a moment and probably make a video about the demo and its performance and such later, but then on January 12th, 2022, it unleashes in full. Hello again, I am Blunty, and I'd like to hear from you if you have or haven't tried Monster Hunter games, and if so, where did you start? How many hours of monster cracking fun has it given you? And if you haven't, curiosity, why not? And if your answer is you're not interested in, then why did you click on this video? I mean, I appreciate the support, but seems weird, right? Now, if by some chance you have clicked on this video and you've never heard of Monster Hunter before now, I'd be a little surprised. Where once it was a pretty niche series with limited brand awareness outside of Japan at least, with a small but extremely passionate and loyal global fanbase, with the release of Monster Hunter World, first on the 8th gen consoles and later on PC in early 2018, it became a significantly more mainstream series. Then, of course, came Monster Hunter Rise earlier this year, a Switch exclusive title, and it was huge, and I mean huge. With sales of over 7.3 million copies, it absolutely destroyed the sales numbers of any previous system exclusive Monster Hunter game before it. But it is still around 10 million sales short of the numbers World has achieved in the last few years across the 3 platforms it's on and 2 console generations it's been updated for. Bit of an unfair advantage, really. But Rise is set for a new burst of sales, and I wonder how much it'll let it catch up to World's sales. Its Nintendo Switch exclusivity period is about to end, and Rise will make its way onto PC, although no word at all on its appearance on the other consoles. It is still, as far as we know, a console exclusive for Nintendo, and will remain that way. And it's also coming with all of the content that has been added to the Switch version to date since its release. And later next year, when the massive DLC update drops, bringing with it a range of new maps, new monsters, new armors, new weapons, and of course the eagerly awaited Master Rank difficulty, both the PC and Switch versions will get that at the same time. So that's pretty awesome. Now, on Nintendo Switch, Rise is of course restrained by the limited processing power, limited graphics resolution, and limited frame rate, but even with all that, I loved it. It's far from the crispiest game you'll ever play on Switch, but I do think it's pretty. I think in general it looks good, it plays smoothly with a surprisingly stable 30 FPS at almost all times, and the finely tuned gameplay easily makes up for the limits in its presentation. But of course on PC, it will be unleashed. Now, you shouldn't expect a complete overhaul of graphics or visual style. The game is, by ground-up design, more stylistic and a lot less gritty and grounded than Monster Hunter World's presentation generally is, and I fully expect the graphics over gameplay types to bitch and whine and complain about how it looks last gen, or looks like a PC game from 2005, or oh, don't the maps look really empty? Or some other predictable garbage you always see with this type of port. And it is still a port of a game that was designed for Switch. We are still getting significant upgrades though. 4K texture resolutions, of course, as you'd expect, but again, still painted over the more stylistic and streamlined models and terrain of Rise. It won't look nearly as impressive or detailed or as gritty as World is capable of looking. But rather more importantly, for my preferences at least, an uncapped frame rate. Rise on Switch, it plays fine, but I spend a lot of time at 60 FPS these days, both on PC and the 9th gen consoles, and after a couple of months away from Rise, when I went back to it recently to check out some new downloadable content and quests, I found stepping back to 30 FPS very jarring indeed. As always, with time I can readjust to it, but there's no denying that in an action combat game like this, with split-second timing of reaction and anticipation being vital to high-skilled performance, and the extreme mobility introduced into this version with the wire bug and mounts, that 60 FPS or greater will make a huge difference in gameplay feel and a much more pleasant experience to look at, and a much more pleasant experience in general. But aside from 4K and aside from the unlocked frame rate, there's another PC exclusive feature that for many players was an achingly annoying omission from the Switch version, thanks to Nintendo's stubbornness and overreaching attitude towards "won't someone think of the children" shit. Voice chat. Native, inbuilt, and seamless voice chat will be included in the PC version by default. A welcome addition for many in this co-op game, which technique and strategy and working together, in particular for multi-monster hunts and boss arenas, is extremely helpful. One more freedom for this game, now released from Nintendo's bizarre rules, the demo, coming this week as I said. There were 2 demos for Nintendo Switch, the second one being largely the same as the first with the exception of the addition of an advanced difficulty hunt against Magnamallow, the flagship monster. The PC demo seems to only come in one flavor because Magnamallow will already be included in it. The other difference is that unlike the Switch demo and many other demos released on the Switch, annoyingly, frustratingly, infuriatingly, seemingly under the choke chain of some bafflingly stupid Nintendo rule where it was play limited. That's right, you could only play the Monster Hunter Rise demo on the Switch for 30 hunts before it locked you out of doing any more hunts. Although this was very easy to circumvent just by deleting the demo's save file from the Switch's data management menu, it was stupid and annoying and ridiculous and pointless all the same. The PC version, of course, comes with no such limitations. Unlimited hunts, play the demo as much as you like because Capcom know damn well this would only piss off a PC player base even more than the Switch players, and PC players, well, tend to have a lot less chill about being effed over like that, and it would be near instantly worked around anyway, much like the Switch was by deleting the save data, or worse, hacked anyway. And I don't think Capcom want people hacking the demo, much less the game. So that's nice, or at least not as shitty and as mean-spirited as the demo play limitation was on Switch. Hard to call it nice when it's just an expected thing to be able to play the demo when you want to play the demo and not be locked out after playing the demo a certain number of times. Nintendo. There's also a little consumables bonus players for the full game will get if they play the demo. They did this with Switch too. One more major difference between the Switch and PC editions is, predictably, mouse and keyboard support. And hopefully Capcom have learned a few hard lessons from when they did this with Monster Hunter World, which initially had awful mouse and keyboard support. People hated it. Now, the Switch version does actually support keyboards, but only for chat and other text input fields. Handy, but yeah, not quite the same thing. But with the PC version, they promise optimized keyboard and mouse controls. Very welcome news for those players of ranged weapons, of course, which never did feel quite as responsive or as accurate as anyone would have liked when limited to thumbsticks. Especially in a game where each different monster has a range of different toughened and vulnerable spots across their bodies, and where accurate head, wing, or tail hits can make a huge difference getting drops, applying statuses, or just plain hunt success. So the accuracy that comes with mouse aiming is going to be extremely welcome for ranged players in particular. Now, PC spec listings are interesting too. As you'd expect, they're pretty low by AAA PC game standards these days because, again, it is a Switch port. So we start at a minimum of an Intel Core i3-4130 or Core i5-3470 or an AMD FX 6100, all quite old CPUs dating back as far as 2011. You'll need a humble 8GB of RAM, easy done, and an NVIDIA GeForce GT 1030 or AMD Radeon RX 550. These look towards low graphics settings at 1080p, 30fps performance target. While the recommended specs, and this gets weird, they call for an Intel Core i5-4460 or an AMD FX 8300 and an NVIDIA GTX 1060, the lower end 3GB model is perfectly acceptable by the way, or an AMD Radeon RX 570 with its 4GB of video RAM. But there's a catch with the so-called recommended settings. Very unusually for a 2021 game release, they're targeting 1080p 30fps for their recommended specs and an average graphics setting, not high. So their so-called ideal playing experience, their recommended playing experience, is locked at 30 FPS and not even using high graphics settings, or very high graphics settings if they're included as well. Not even 1440p or 4K, for a port that pings 4K textures as one of its flag features that they put in the trailer. It seems weird, very, very weird to have their recommended settings targeting 1080p 30 FPS. Stupid. But that said, any 20 or 30 series RTX card, or the mid to high-end 10 series even, will probably just monster this game anyway, so not really an issue, just a very bizarre thing to do. And I suspect the only reason even the minimum settings call for the lowest end of the 10 series cards is because the 900 series has more limited support for the DX12 feature set, which is another interesting note. It uses DX12. The Switch doesn't. The Switch uses other graphics APIs, so Rise with DX12 support is new and interesting. But if you're hoping for some DX12 Ultimate DXR ray tracing, I wouldn't necessarily hold your breath for that one. I feel like they would have called that out in the trailer if that was going to be the case. A man can dream though. Ray-traced lighting and shadows in this game would be wonderful, especially given how much water and ice and other atmospherics there are on some of the maps. And of course how many monsters spit out glowing elements like fire. Can you imagine ray-traced fire bouncing off the ice caves? Oh, can you imagine ray-traced lighting in the lava caves? Oh. Next up, cross-play and cross-save. I would also not hold your breath for either of these. We can hope, but Capcom did run a user survey immediately after the initial announcements and release of the trailer for the PC version, and on that survey they specifically asked about player interest in cross-play and cross-save. So there is some hope that they're looking towards this. They're trying to gauge user interest to see if it's worth the effort of doing it. But I'd bet on cross-save at least, hopefully even cross-progression to allow fluid switching between platforms instead of a manual save shifting method, because I'd love to seamlessly move from PC to Switch and back again in a single gameplay save without having to manually shift the save back and forth. There are already several games with PC and Switch cross-save features on the system, although many save transfers are pretty clunky, like Minecraft for example. There are still others that do offer true cross-progression, like the similarly Monster Fighter-themed Dauntless, and Rocket League, and Fortnite of course, to name just a couple of other huge names in the field. But crossplay is a slightly tricky one, especially for the notoriously overprotective Nintendo. Obviously, voice chat would need to be disabled by default in any crossplay situation because, well, the Switch doesn't support it at all. That aside, seeing as it is a cooperative PvE game, so no one's really disadvantaged with playing with or against PC players, and the game of course has some pretty decent preset non-verbal communication features built in, there's no reason it couldn't work perfectly well. Except, of course, for the fact that this was the first game on Nintendo Switch to use Nintendo's new own rebuilt multiplayer server architecture and systems. And it works way better than their old system did, by the way. Thank goodness, because the old system was horrible. But frankly, I have no idea if they built that with any kind of cross-system play in mind. Probably not, knowing Nintendo. But again, there are quite a lot of examples of multi-platform games that can happily cross-play on Switch. Dauntless, again, of course, being a very relevant example, a very similar game. And like I said, I know I'd like to be able to play with cross-platform people, so hopefully the player community is loud enough on this issue, and hopefully it gets implemented at launch. And of course, with many Rise players having already hundreds, even thousands in some cases, or more hours in Rise since the Switch launch, you can bet the call for cross-save will be very loud too. There's a lot of endgame grinding for the rarest, most powerful drops and RNG loot lottery systems that I'd bet a lot of existing players looking to move to PC would prefer not to start from scratch on. Personally, I'm 500 hours in on Switch, and I'm not entirely against the thought of starting fresh on PC, just to experience it all over again. But there's also part of me that worked very hard on building every last set of armor and every last weapon variant, and building a couple of dozen mixed sets for very specialized gameplay, and I'd like to keep that work, I think. What if I could do both? Have a fresh character and bring my old stuff over? Yes, please. The game already supports multiple save files. But lastly, of course, and certainly not leastly, there's modding. The modding scene for PC games, and the modding scene for Monster Hunter World in particular, was very active, with all kinds of wild and wacky and interesting stuff. Everything from the typical, what if we replace the monster with Thomas the Tank Engine kind of goofy stuff, right through to the more serious stuff of bringing old gear and weapons and old monsters and old skins back in from previous games. So I'm excited to see what modders do with Rise when it comes to Switch. It could be a ton of fun and extend the game's life even further. But that's about it for now and everything you need to know about Monster Hunter Rise coming to PC. Hope you found it interesting, informative, useful. I am Blunty. Thank you very much to the patrons, of course, and I will catch you next time.